So welcome everybody to this meeting at which we're going to present a conference paper. And thank you so much for sparing some time to meet with us. So this is the Pedagogies in Teacher and Graduate Education. It's our meeting 9 at Western Education. And today we are having some guests who are from outside Western University. So happy to see everyone, and we are so much looking to this conversation and to hearing from everyone. But before we will, so the presentation we're going to be doing is on blending pedagogies in higher education, connecting technology and scholarship in a learning community. And I'm very, I've been very privileged in the last few months to work with 3 scholars, Elaine Fournier and Nina Sedagut. In terms of reflecting at the data that we have collected so far. And so we're going to be presenting about our preliminary analysis, and we will let you know about a publication where rigorous analysis may be found. We've listed keywords there to clue us in, because many of us, this might be our first meeting, and for some of us, it might be the one meeting that we have attended this year. So we are about scholarship of teaching, community of practice, but especially professional learning as people would teach, online, on-site, and blended teaching. And so when we talk about pedagogies, we are like this, there's a multiplicity of pedagogies, and this is our professional development. So we understand better and we reflect better on approaches that we might be already doing, or those that we might be looking forward to begin to doing. Now the meeting is being moderated by the Department of Technology at Western, and we have Ruprit Shimi moderating the meeting for us, and she's being assisted by Hiba Bareke, and you have received emails from Hiba, who helped us organize this meeting and make sure we knew where to be at this place. So thanks, Hiba, and thanks, Shimi. Now, in terms of everyone, your participation is going to be mainly in, about the artifact, if you brought any, or the material or image or meta fund. We are going to be giving you examples of technology for you to share about your pedagogy if you felt that that's important for you to bring and show. And also part B, is to engage in groups, small groups. So we're going to be breaking out in groups, possibly 4 groups, and talk about questions under B. And the questions include which pedagogies you use, which images in your mind or physically help you understand your approaches to teaching, how do you continue to learn, or how did you learn about pedagogies, what structures support your professional learning about teaching, the role of conversations, and their impact in your own teaching. So conversations with others, with your colleagues, with people you co-plan with. So we'll be speaking about that. And additionally, we are going to be brainstorming about our own sharing and experiences. How do we analyze that? Which frameworks do we use to understand that, and which categories? So we'll be doing that together. And there will be 3 opportunities to do that for up to 10 minutes. And the presentation outline is what we are going to do. Again, we are going to do our introductions, which will include people introductions. We're going to have audience interactions around the people introductions. Then we'll share with you the literature that has helped us make sense of our participation and reflections in the conversations on pedagogies. We're going to share with you how we are inquiring about this and the results we are presenting. Then we'll break out in rooms and talk about more about pedagogies. We'll share with you the results. And then again, we'll break out in small groups and talk about the implications of our conversations. And then we'll share with you the discussion conclusions, and we have resources to share with you. So in the picture there is a picture taken by one of us at a meeting where we really got into presenting and representing how we teach, how we see our students, how we see our roles, and how we see the different ways we teach, how they interact. So that's an example of some of the artifacts and the images and the creations we do to articulate our learning about teaching and our reflection about teaching. This is the time when we usually in the COP speak about who we are and what we do. And then we share any materials we would have brought. And when we introduce ourselves, we also mention a little bit about how we teach what pedagogies we use to teach, if we can name those, or ways of teaching, either that we are currently using modeling or those that we are interested in. So my name is Immaculate Kizito Namkasa, and I teach in the Faculty of Education at Western University. I usually teach math education classes, and I do also research classes. And very recently, I'm interested in my role as a teaching fellow in broadly exploring and modeling teaching that uses maker pedagogies. So maker pedagogies as in maker spaces, and in making and doing it and repurposing the things we've been using for the good of teaching, so maker education. And that's briefly where my interest comes from in this pedagogies, conversation of pedagogies meetings.
This is Mina Sadagaju. I used to be in Western University, and now I'm in Alfred University in the States, and I'm very happy to continue my collaboration on this study. So my pedagogy usually is a digital pedagogy in STEM education. I teach different courses in integration methods, especially with a focus on mathematics education and STEM education. The first image that you saw there was part of my work using like touch counts and other application that helps students to understand and get to touch abstract mathematical objects through digital experience.
Hi, so my name is Elaine Fournier, and I teach the Masters of Professional Education courses at the Faculty of Education at Western. I teach fully online, and so I'm very interested in the pedagogies of digital learning. I'm also very interested in culturally responsive pedagogies, and my areas of research are specific to students with exceptionalities and inclusive educational settings. And so I look at the interplay of those pedagogies and how they impact students who have special needs.
Small OP, but it's also a community of practice because our conversations have been going for a while, and that also abbreviates as COP. So communities of practice is what we're going to be mainly abbreviating as COP. Now, in the presentation today, we present our analysis of evidence from the community of practice for instructors in the Faculty of Education, but we are open to collaborations with people from other faculties. The goal of the presentation is to reflect on different types of pedagogical practices of members, and these are already been varied practices, as we shall see. We discuss the ways in which both social learning and online technology have connected and have been harnessed to support professional learning for all of us who are part of the community of practice. We do take a practice-oriented approach on the scholarship of teaching and professional development of faculty, as opposed to a research-oriented approach in this particular presentation. So we are reserving the research-oriented approach for a journal publication. So we share analysis of feedback from members, notes, visual models, and stories from the members. We'll skip to slide number 8, and then we'll tell you more about the communities of practice so far. So for us, this is a reflection. So slide number 9, we'll head to. So the community of practice and introduction. We speak first about the context. So as we said, we are part of a Faculty of Education where even prior to the pandemic, we taught both online, on-site, and in blended programs at the bachelor's level, graduate and advanced qualifications. We're actually at one time a very large online program provider, which shrank at the advanced qualifications, and then we built it up again for the graduate programs, which we offer online, including the EDD that Seve mentioned to be part of, and that Elaine said she teaches in. Now, we are being supported by the work of the unit at the university called the Center for Teaching and Learning, the CTL, and many universities have those. as well as our department in education for technology. Now, few departments, even at Western itself, would have each faculty having its technology department. So we've been very privileged to have moderation and to have questions responded to and support from that department. We have mainly used OWL until this meeting and one of the interviews when we have begun to use Zoom, mainly because today we wanted to record and provide a recording separately from OWL. That's why we use Zoom. But OWL affords us similar things as Zoom does afford us, and previously it afforded us to meet with people who would only come to the meetings via online because they were teaching from distant places. So we're also going to talk about in the next slide on the COP processes and structure. So our structures are such that we have been meeting 3 to 4 times a year, beginning February 2018, and our goals have been to collectively construct new meanings and improve professional skills. And we have had people who are experts and people who are novices together. So it's been to improve own skills, but those skills usually have been already much developed for many people. And also being in the Faculty of Education, people have research interest in pedagogies. So we have had people bring their expertise. So we have done the activities we talked about selected pedagogies, showcasing, reflecting, and further refining. We've shared examples, frameworks, affordances, constraints, and supports and resources. So in the results section of the presentation, we're going to outline what worked and the ways in which members made sense of their diverse teaching and social learning landscapes in the context of this COP. So we're going to also be sharing with you about the literature review, or the literature that informs our understanding. So we did call them COP because the unit that supports this work at Western, the CTL, also runs other communities of practice, but we do recognize this variety of frameworks that we could use to frame our participation as a group interested in pedagogies. So mainly the literature by Wenger and Trainer, and Wenger and Trainer, the two, they go by the same name. And that's, we have a reference to that, a website. But also the people who have drawn from the work of Wenger and looked at the interactions in COP and how they're based on mutual trust among members and other conditions that make COP more productive. So members have been willing to share ideas and expose their ignorance. In fact, we have taken ignorance as an asset in practice when we teach students, but also for us as instructors to learn and to make. And we draw here from our members who come from ECE, of making curriculum, but also making pedagogies and making content. So also the work on situated specific practice, the original work by LaVey and Wenger, which is about social theory of activity participation, as well as PD and professional learning communities as they apply mainly in the professional school context. So we have more literature to share with you, and this is about professional development. So there's literature on collective situated learning in job-embedded professional development. So this is as opposed to self-directed individual people professional development. And there's also the social cognitive approach by Bandula, which we use to reflect on our analysis, as well as the notions that we have found to be key. Notions such as different forms of participation, peripheral and core, as well as landscapes of identities in relation to expertise. Now, also there's work by Blanton that has adopted the work on situated cognition to digital and social infrastructures that support learning of faculty, as well as the work of Darling Hammond and others on professional development in the context of schools, as well as in healthcare professions. Now, in terms of analyzing our data, we have also drawn from connectivism and maker education. Now, for faculty professional development, there is also more literature that does inform our work. And we have identified 2 gaps mainly. So there's a gap that has been identified in the literature that increasingly at the universities or in higher education, including colleges and community colleges, there's a lost academic practice of groups of teachers regularly talking about learning and teaching. There's a different narrative than the narrative of coming together at meetings and committing some time in that social learning dynamic. And also there's a loss of the roles of affect and its role in research on teaching. That's Gibbs, who comes in from researching in the context of a provider of PD to faculty at the universities. We also noticed that much of the literature is not by faculty learning about their own practice, but it's usually by units or providers of PD for faculty. So this literature informs our work and the conditions for professional development of faculty staff and how it's built upon different characteristics, including mutual trust, as well as nurturing relationships and professional dialogue. So we made those key, and every member, not just the leaders or the people who reflected, but every member made those key to our participation in the professional community of practice. So next, I'm going to share briefly about the methods and design of the presentation that we are doing today. So our major work was again on that learning community, and that's what we focused on in analyzing what was productive and not productive. The data that we mainly present on is based on the needs assessment at the beginning, the meeting notes and recordings, as well as the resources that we archive in our site. The journal manuscript, which is another endeavor, we'll rigorously analyze, and it's being drafted under the leadership of Elaine and Mina. I will analyze the follow-up reflection and follow-up interviews. So we came to our questions later because we began as a faculty development social learning community. So our inquiry questions were about how do instructors enact the pedagogies in their practices, and how are these practices informed by or inform the conversations that instructors participate in. So we looked at what pedagogies, how these are blended, what images are key and why, and in what ways does participation in conversations on pedagogies, however different, formal and informal, impact teaching and learning. And so this brings us to the next audience participation to speak about the same thing. It's like a mirror of what happened over the years, but today in the context of us listening to the presentation, would like to break in small rooms and then speak about the question on engaging, the question on how do we learn about pedagogies? How do we engage each other when we're learning about pedagogies? What structures support our professional learning about teaching? And so
do we want to start with the first question? How do we learn about pedagogies? Should we start with that one?
For sure.
Well, we learn about them through, should I tell you how I learned about them? I learned about them by doing them. I had a great model when I started teaching high school Spanish. I had a model teacher, and I was welcomed by her one day, and I followed her around her class. She had a cart, and we would go to different classrooms. We taught our Spanish in different classrooms. So she modeled what learning and teaching a foreign language or a modern language would be like. So as I worked with her, that was my first instruction on how to be a great teacher, because I knew she was considered a wonderful teacher. So then that's how my learning of doing hands-on and interactive and using visuals for teaching Spanish began. But then I also moved that when I left the Spanish teaching position and worked as a literacy specialist, I still knew that visual learning, using visuals and hands-on prompts, active learning was essential for students even learning literacy and how to read and write. And so I think by modeling, by getting it from other teachers, we learn a lot. And then practicing it in our own classrooms, we learn, it reinforces what we think. And then by seeing our students actually progress and own success, I think that's the way that we learn different pedagogies, by actually practicing them.
You broke that down very well, Kelly. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
I would agree with Kelly about learn by doing. I think that's how I learned how to teach, specifically in my teaching context. I would go to more experienced teachers for questions and ask for suggestions. Another way of practicing is to really get to know my students. I really enjoyed hosting lots of one-on-one feedback with the students, so I know exactly what their questions are, and how I can help them. I can also hear what they need so that I can tailor my way of teaching to fit their needs. Another way I really enjoyed was when I was at grad school, and still I really enjoy reading different research papers to learn from what other people have spent so much time to study, and I can just get the results. It's fantastic. I worked for a couple months at Western for an experiential learning project. So I learned all those things about experiential learning. I think it's great. And I'm trying to use some limited types in my class, like in class simulation. I could do much, but I really hope the students could like use experiential learning because that really benefits them.
So Leanne, you're teaching the program that teaches vocabulary and literacies, and we've had people speak about multimodal and multiliteracy pedagogies, and Kelly also taught in a language, in the Spanish language. So what pedagogies seem to be dominant or productive in the area of teaching languages. And I'm just throwing a question out there before I tell you what we usually use in math education.
Mm-hmm.
So far I've learned of a couple, just like the whole language approach versus the phonetic approach. So are we breaking up the words, or are we learning it through the context of a whole sentence? And then through like flashcards, or there's just different strategies to use. And then when I was, I also did the teaching program at OTESSA. So I noticed there in the primary junior division, when I was doing observation, some of the teachers would say that they're against spelling tests and it's only for memorization. And other teachers are like, I'll use a spelling test, but I'll use it with like interactively with a making words lesson. Yeah. So it depends, I think, on the teacher, on what they believe in. So.
Good.
So that is a nice segue in math education. So in the math education, we've had the new curriculum in Ontario rolled out the day before, and it looks, it's being promoted as a procedural curriculum, but when you look closely, the procedure is there, is highlighted, the basic facts, the flashcards that are not interactive, but there's 4 other strands, and 2 of them, one is emotional and mathematics processes, and the other one is coding and computational thinking, which is interactive and using materials. So in terms of relating to language, so the whole is there, the whole language approach, the conceptual to math education is there, but also the procedure, hopefully in an interactive way when interactives help, but maybe also not in a non-interactive way when that's the most appropriate to use, and also depending on the student's emotion. So there's some strings there that threads that relate to math education, the basics as compared to the more interactive and the more holistic ones. And myself, I think having both for whenever is appropriate and depending on the students is what might be the best practice.
That brings up the idea of concrete to the abstract. I'm thinking in math, where the students have to see concretely, they have to actually visualize and be able to manipulate things before they can work with abstract. And so I equate that with phonics skills, teaching them the letters of the alphabet, letting them use magnetic letters, having them make the letters using Play-Doh or hands-on kind of activities before they can actually be more abstract with the language and reading the language abstractly. They need to see concrete letters and sounds so that they can have the base foundation to work with and to become abstract thinkers. Mm-hmm.
That's very helpful. And now I'm curious, but I won't ask Katie. I was going to ask about the relation between Spanish and English in terms of teaching the same thing. Maybe that's a different conversation altogether.
That is another conversation for sure. Mm-hmm.
Yes, this is actually my slide, Mina. I was giving it away. So in terms of the results, the very earlier results were the basis of finding out what to speak about in our meetings. So we looked at, we had an assessment, and instructors, faculty, and TAs did participate as well as postdoc, and we are grouping all those categories for the purposes of this presentation as faculty. So faculty responded that teach in higher education, and they selected different pedagogies. Now this came out as the most subscribed that people were interested in: 21st century teaching, hands-on and digital technologies, storytelling pedagogies, as well as culturally relevant pedagogies. But there were more we did provide there, and there were others suggested. So we learned from others, depending on which areas and disciplines they were coming from within education, about other pedagogies of interest.
Shall we go to the next slide? Thank you. So what you see in this table shows the different dimension of pedagogy considered by the COP members as they met and they discussed about different pedagogy that they take. So these broader clusters of pedagogies in the middle and the title of table group with distinctive features, and then were converged on as members made sense of their diverse teaching and professional social learning landscapes. So each of the clusters of pedagogies below was the interest to at least 2 members on that meeting, or not only one meeting, in series of meetings. So in other words, COP members agreed that pedagogies differed on several dimensions. For example, they were talking about the space, place, change, and time, about pedagogies of online, blended, and session environments that involve doing, feeling, thinking, and being transformative, and their flexibility. So the pedagogies, as we discussed and found in our COP, could be represented by 5 broader clusters that they are in the right side of the slide, like design, hands-on, maker education, and materiality, blended digital and online pedagogies, caring, culturally responsive, food and wellness, deep imaginative, surprise, participatory storytelling, and then healing, global, transformative, and other sorts of pedagogies. Shall we go to the next slide, please? In our CEP meetings, we had a chance to show and work with the artifacts. At the interviews, 3 members elaborated on the pedagogies that they practice in their teaching. 3 of the pedagogies cluster identified were elaborated upon by interviewees later in the interviews that we ran as focus group. So as you see in this shape, this is an example of an artifact where the member were explaining her hands-on pedagogy in a digital era that brings abstract mathematical concept to an existence. Shall we go to the next one, please? Okay, so this is some in-depth analysis of the results. As you see, there are some bubbles there that talk about, explain what we observed during the interview, and it can be related to the connect and communicate in COP meetings. As you see, for example, the pedagogies could be multimodal literacy pedagogy or multiliteracy pedagogy, as our member 1 is talking about, or it could be pedagogy of dialogue that our member 2 is talking about, and also an alternative pedagogy that, or multiliteracy or digital literacy, as you see there. So also in these groups, they talked about, as I said, place, space, change, time, feeling, doing, thinking, and also pedagogies as methodologies pointing to the ontology and assumption of teaching. So what I've observed during the 10 minutes of breakout rooms, I just saw that, again, these bubbles comes up. So we had one of the members who was talking about big questioning that could lead their pedagogy. That might be another way of thinking about the dialogue as a pedagogy, or there were also some discussion about alternative way of pedagogy, that how they are interchanging based on what we have learned from the students and from the environment and from the way that we are interacting with our own pedagogy. Thank you.
Okay, and I think that Mina's turning it over to me at this point. And so we're going to continue to talk a little bit about the results from our meeting notes. And Mina talked about those clusters. And so this particular slide is focused on one of those clusters, cluster number 4, which was about the pedagogy of surprise. And so the member who is there, the member's artifact, which is the drawing that we're showing here, is showing this link between embodied and surprise pedagogies. And this member reflected on the role of surprise in this embodied pedagogy, and also volunteered to participate in a follow-up interview with us. The member placed emphasis on the decision of a teacher when responding to surprise. So there was a lot of importance placed on this pedagogical decision-making that fell to that professionalism of the teacher. 2 kinds of surprise pedagogy were involved. And these are the members' words: when the surprise bubbles up, how would you respond to that? And then when the teacher is anticipating that surprise, to use it as a learning opportunity, such as a provocation perhaps. And then there was some discussion as well in the early years about setting out provocations, and that further tied in to some of our discussions about maker education and offering opportunities for that. So that is what is depicted on this slide. Thank you for advancing. So when we continue to talk about the surprise in pedagogy, we have some of the members' voices. So as Immaculate has explained to us so beautifully prior, we're trying to capture in this presentation what are the voices of our members over a 2-year period. And so here are some of the salient features of some of the things they said. One of the members said that her teaching utilized different kinds of surprise: the surprise designed by the teacher for pedagogical intent, and the surprise that comes up from the instructor to use as a teachable moment. Another member spoke about the surprise being central in that dialogical pedagogy. So here we see that blending, and I know that Immaculate's going to speak to that later on as well, that blending of pedagogies was very important. And so at one of the meetings, there was a reference to surprise as a pedagogy, and that had also been made by another member. And so I'll let you, you don't need to hear my voice all the time to read all of them. I'll give you a second to just kind of pause on that. All the interview participants mentioned more than one pedagogy at play or in use within their practice. So for example, there was a pedagogy of multimodal or multiliteracies, and a pedagogy for formal assessment that really went hand in hand. And this is what the members' words were. Or finding a voice that was always, and this member was saying that that had resonated with Vygotsky, and that she or he could articulate this mediated consideration that drove the pedagogy. And there was this sense of an experiential or a doing, a twisting to it all. And another member talked to us about how they implemented throughout the curriculum project-based learning, and how that these things were mixed together. Okay, thank you. If you could advance the slide. And so in the previous slide, there was this metaphor of twisting, which came out as a metaphor of braiding as well. And that's the central image to this slide. When we looked at making pedagogies, blending pedagogies, but there was also a sense of contrasting pedagogies. So members in the on-site small groups used crafting and digital technology to make representations of their pedagogies in practice and how they saw these various pedagogies interacting with one another. So in this image, the image of a braid, this particular member highlighted the movement, tension, and space that happens between the braid. And very, very rich quote. And I'm going to revoice for you, although you have it here. I would choose a braid. Looking at the space in between, in my practice, I'm increasingly well prepared, but not terribly planned. And it allows me that freedom to be led. But then there's these gaps within the braid that allow me to be responsive with the community as we're enacting education. And so just an absolutely lovely, rich quote from one of our members. If you want to move on to the next slide. And further to our results then, continuing to discuss this idea of making and contrasting pedagogies, but now very focused on the student. So what was the sense of making and contrasting pedagogies as very intentional or purposeful decisions that the educators were making about how they were planning, what provocations they would be laying out for their students, but then there was also this sense of what happened with the students, that constructivist aspect to it. I don't like that word deliver because I think we're always making it as we go along, and it's not just with us, it's with our students, so that the learner, so being more aware of the fact that, well, that the learning happening in the classroom is something that's made together. And when speaking about the pedagogy, another member said that there was this practice of sharing several of the knowledge artifacts created by the students in the course, and that was shared with us. And that was also a rich opportunity for us to further our analysis with the paper that Immaculate was referencing. Okay, so if you want to move on. And continuing on then. So with regard to this then, we have some member feedback. So we looked at what happened, Immaculate described this earlier, that we were analyzing the dialogue that took place, the conversations that took place, the artifacts that were created, but members were also invited to provide us with some formal feedback. And here's what one member had to say. Member feedback and follow-up reflection was in terms of the COP structure, which they found enabling and valuable. They specifically identified relational trust and safety to share ideas as enablers. My interactions with the COP group and one member created new and novel opportunities for me to bridge the theory-practice divide. This member's work in technology and mathematics held the potential to directly support our local professional learning community in my field of practice. And so from the reflection, there were several factors that relate back to the previous slide, much earlier in our presentation, when we looked at some of the literature that informed our understanding. And this came out as a salient feature amongst this particular feedback excerpt. And that was that the COP's openness to online participation afforded the member access to participate in the group despite geographic distance, that the leader's consistent communication via email gave a sense of being in the loop, and that various members of the COP were genuinely interested in one another's professional success and challenges. And these factors were factors that came up when we were looking at social communication as espoused by Ben Dora. And the next slide. And so while there were many positive things that came out of the COP structure, some barriers or challenges were also identified. And interviewers spoke about these barriers and impacts of this COP and other collaborative and networking opportunities in which they learned about their pedagogies. And so one of the members identified this particular barrier. I will say that for me, a barrier to participation with your community of practice is the pacing of them. My sense is that every number of months away, well, I sort of get a taste and then I feel disconnected during those gaps and in between. So that would be a barrier. And that's something that I know, you know, as a group, very rich information for us to go back and reflect upon as we move and learn our way forward with our community of practice. And I think at this point, I'm turning it back perhaps to Mina or Immaculate.
Immaculate. Thank you so much, Elaine and Mina, for taking us through the results. That was where the depth and breadth was of this presentation. So we're going to do some audience participation in the small groups again. We'll take 7 minutes this time. And we're going to speak about the last two questions. on what role do conversations, if any, do they play? Conversations on teaching, what role do they play? And what's the impact of engaging in these conversations or other forms of PD on our teaching? And then feel free to provide some preliminary analysis to reflect on each other's contribution. So we are speaking about the role as well as the impact in small groups for 7 minutes, and then we'll come back to talk about the discussion and implications.
Just when I think of the role of conversations, I have conversations with teachers and colleagues, and my sister is an elementary principal. And so we have great conversations about teaching. And always what strikes me when I get off the phone or when I come back to my house and think about working with that person or talking to that person, I think, wow, now I'm excited. Now I'm invigorated. Now I'm going to try what she just suggested, or this makes me think about this, this, and this. I always get like excited and invigorated when I get to talk to other people about the things that we do as professionals. So excitement is what comes to my mind when I get to talk to other people in conversations. Sometimes some very good ideas that will help me brainstorm into a course that I may be teaching or a meeting that I might be running. Some of those things happen from just a regular conversation.
I think confidence is another thing that we can get from conversations with colleagues. Sometimes when I'm not sure what I'm doing because it's a new thing I'm trying, and I would talk to my colleagues and then they would assure me whether it's a good idea or not. So that would really give me confidence, and sometimes having conversations with students to know what they really liked also give me confidence. Conversation also helped me to learn what I can do to improve, to do better in teaching. So yeah.
That's good. Very good.
I'll just build off of that a little bit. And I think conversations are really important with other teachers so that you can learn what might work for a specific grade or a specific group of students, or even an individual student, finding what works, what doesn't work, and getting their advice is really helpful.
So for me, when I began teaching at the university, I was working in a course that had multiple sections. And so we had, it was coordinated. So we had regular conversations, but we also planned the course outline together. And that was very invaluable for me starting to teach in a different context that I mainly learned in as a bachelor's student because I studied elsewhere. So the conversations helped me see how other instructors think about their decisions and how they plan, and how that was different from what I did, but they also made me appreciate what I was bringing to the conversation and also to the coordinated courses. So they also helped me value what over time I had embodied or learned and I was ready to enact in teaching that was rich. So I was also, I began appreciating what I had to offer in teaching in higher education. So I found that very valuable at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that we seek out others to have conversations day to day, or, you know, every other day at least, to have conversations about teaching so that we stay refreshed and we stay excited and we stay generally current with what's going on in the schools. Mm-hmm.
So Mina has told us there's 3 more minutes left, so we have plenty of time. Yeah, staying current is one thing that I found very interesting, especially with, I've been very conservative with networking online, but in terms of staying current, I think that's an attraction to being able to engage with some communities via technology, because it's easy to keep current. Now, Kelly, you mentioned something interesting that I'd never thought about, that the conversations even outside our units and how our institutions, conversations with family, for instance, with friends that are also teachers, or even with our own children or relatives who are kids at school. And those conversations are equally exciting and enriching, as well as informative and helping us keep up to date. I just noticed that, so I thought I would comment.
Where I worked, we have a team room, so all the teachers can work there. They don't have to, but we can. So there are a lot of conversations happening, just like what we said, to get the excitement, to help each other, to figure out things. It's very important. I think it's one way of working together as a community. So it's great. I also found it's very helpful to talk to teachers who teach different subjects. Like one thing I really enjoyed working with Immaculate was because we're in different areas. I learned a lot of things from the math side, and I went to schools with Immaculate to collect the data, and I explored a little bit about how to use computational thinking in ESL teaching. Just for the literature part, I am still very interested in that because it's really interactive and engaging. And yeah, like one of the days I really would like to try how that would work out for language learning.
And I'm also learning a lot from ECE colleagues, because the approach in ECE is early childhood education seems to be very interactive. And I'm also learning from people who teach in private education, because private schools, because they seem to have these packages of pedagogies. Not that I want to borrow the whole packages, but I'm contrasting my own pedagogies and seeing how they're informed by different pedagogies in different disciplines, as you say, Louis, but also in this different settings.
Interesting.
So we are at 8 minutes. I am suggesting we go. So in terms of our discussions, we felt that technology had a role, and it was a potential prior to the pandemic. We thought there was a potential of interacting via digital technology for social learning. I guess if there's any lesson to learn from the pandemic that we can take, is that we have been resilient and we seem to be surviving, interacting online, but it has a role in terms of connecting with each other. And the research there that is helpful is the research on connectivism, how to interact and learn, and how knowledge becomes decentered from the individual to the networks. And that will be addressed more in the journal publication. Now, we also found that Banjira's work on how the group functions and the ways that are more productive, very helpful. So how group functioning is the product of the coordinative ways of the members. So the members had a big role to play. Also the dynamics included how the group is structured, that we found important from the feedback, as well as how members we're willing to interact with one another in mutually supportive ways. Now, we also look at the clusters. We find those very helpful, especially one member said we have to. Teaching is a methodology, pedagogy is a methodology, and we have to question our assumptions on which it's based. So by clustering the pedagogies, we are able to question and reflect on the shared tenets or assumptions. So we found that helpful. Now, what came out also, and it did come out in our small group, is that we are designing, we are repurposing, and we are creating pedagogy as instructors and content. One interviewer talked about making content in dialogic pedagogy, and another one from the early childhood experience and research talked about making curriculum. So there we learn about making pedagogies beyond where we thought pedagogies are usually made in maker spaces in STEM and design, and pedagogies of materials in sports, also in our areas where we teach, such as literacy, mathematics, as well as other areas. Now, we also learned about PD structures that we are helpful. For us, they were mainly about professional engagement, collaboration, reflective dialogue among colleagues, mutual trust, and social networking. And we've listed their research and included in the references that informs that, discussion there. So one of our closer to final slides is about the implications and conclusions. And we thought, what a better way to speak about this in terms of the whole group. So to have a conversation in terms of how we interpret this as scholars ourselves, as the people having the conversations and doing the PD on our own teaching. In the paper, one of the implications we found is that professional learning in connected communities is challenged by institutional factors. And that's the more reason why we are having these conversations. And some of them are about how institutions are currently organized in terms of a neoliberal management culture and the widening research and teaching dichotomy for those who engage in research. Now also, we learned that while technologies exist that can be harnessed for online meetings, a few before the pandemic again were utilized for PD, scholarship of teaching, and collaboration. So hopefully, if there's a lesson we've learned, is that we can continue to do this even when we have to do it at distances or at different times in a synchronous way. So I would like us to reflect on the implications and conclusions together, but I'll present very briefly on the next steps. So our next steps, if you're interested in speaking with us on your pedagogy, I would like to interview you and analyze that data for our own community of practice. Now, a journal publication analyzes our analysis on the interviews and reflection data, and that's ready to be submitted. And what we have recorded today is going to be submitted for blogging at the OTESSA conference website. I would like to go back to the discussion after making a few acknowledgements. Acknowledge the members who contributed to the data. So the data was collected under ethics and funding of the Center for Teaching and Learning, and we declare that we have no conflict of interest, and more especially to thank the different RAs that have worked in this community of practice. Louis is here with us today. Hiba Barek, finishing her dissertation, is attending and helped us, invite us to the presentation. Maja, Hisham, and Hatis. Hatis
I just wanted to share that how our small group discussion were very rich, and I'm sure if we could analyze those conversation would lead us really to the great place. So members were talking about the role that COP can play in advancing pedagogies by acknowledging diversity, for the people who are coming with common beliefs or sharing the same values, and how this is important to be in a safe environment, feeling safe to talk about their ideas and do the conversation and communication in different ways that may involve using artifacts plus like verbal communication. If any of those people in our group would like to share their ideas, you're more than welcome, please.
And Mina, if no one is wanting to share from the small group, then at this point I'll share a little bit of just a little bit of a summary of the small group conversation that we had. And similarly, I just want to thank the participants for their willingness to share their pedagogy and just, you know, openly talk about what's happening in their own educational context. And two areas came up in our very brief time together about, one of them was about the importance of communication. And so we talked about how that communication can take place both formally and informally. And one of the members of the small group talked about how valuable small group, very informal conversations really supported rich pedagogical understanding for advancing the learning of their students. And then that conversation also turned to a discussion around assessment and the need to really be able to harmonize or blend competing interests of having to be able to assess rapidly and quickly and precisely with a desire to want to make that assessment rich and meaningful and valuable. And so one of the members of the small group spoke about a digital tool that he's using, and others were able to kind of chime in on that. So certainly if the members, I'm only revoicing the conversation, it's always much more valuable if it comes from them. So if anyone from our small group would like to share, that would be wonderful.
I could say a quick sentence about the tool I've been using, and the Faculty of Science at Western has been using for marking exams, and that's GradeScope. Basically, the idea is when you have it's building a rubric kind of thing as you go, where you have say like this person, okay, they made this mistake, I'm going to take off 2 points for this. But then later on, you say, oh, well, this other person made the same mistake. Well, you took off 2 points for this other person, and so that thing's already in the rubric, and you just click that button, and now it takes off 2 points for that reason. And then later on, you can say, well, actually, I think that's only worth 1 point off, and then you could take off 1 point there. You can also even be modified, and I have had my TAs do this during the term, to be used to work with more traditional rubrics, and because it allows you to also annotate the page and add individual comments to the students, and we're still adding features to the site, but it's mostly I think aimed at science type things where you're taking off points for individual errors or mistakes, but you can have as many of these types of mistakes you want. And the best thing I think for me is that it allows me to collect data about what the mistakes the students made. So it's okay, well, I have 1 point off for this mistake. I also have 1 point off for this other mistake that this other person made, but I can now see, okay, well, 50 out of my 100 students made this mistake here, whereas 70 out of 100 made this other mistake or something. It's already been helping me when I'm grading my current final exam in terms of collecting data.
Avi, we have a question for you in the chat. They're asking if it's a free app.
It is not free. The Faculty of Science at Western has a license for it. It's called GradeScope. I'll type the name in the chat. GradeScope. I don't know how licensing for it works. I think it is made by the same people who make Turnitin, that service.
Very nice, thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to. So thank you so much, everyone, for your participation in the small group. Lots of rich conversation, as well as in the chat and in the whole group. If